Welcome to the reality show. We are continuing with our coverage of the war in Israel. Of course, I am joined by Marco and Richard, Michael, Kirk, and Nathan, who is back. We last time you were on this show, you were talking about I think it was the judicial reform in Israel, right? And of course, that issue is no longer temporarily not an issue in Israeli politics because Israel was attacked by savages just under 2 weeks ago, and that is the only issue right now in Israel. It's also the only issue on this channel because I think it goes far beyond Israel, and much like 9/11, how the world responds is is going to be something that we will have consequences for many decades to come either way. So our first topic later on in the show, we're going to talk about the BBC's coverage of this the issue and the fact that they don't like using the word terrorists when talking about terrorists, and we will also be talking about the protests in Western cities. But our first topic is what should a post-war Gaza look like? If as always with titles and thumbnails, if it's on me, I will say so. I asked Daniel for that thumbnail that you can see, and that is my answer to what a post-war Gaza should look like. Nathan, I'm going to go to you first. You are not in Israel, right? You left as this started, which I think is the right choice. I mean, I left before it started, so I obviously agree with that decision. You are. I don't know if you want to tell people where they are. Where you are, because yesterday we saw, when Gilad was on the show. Right when the show started, there were rockets fired to central Israel. So we know Hamas is watching. But they're avid viewers of the reality show. But Nathan, I will go to you first.
No, I'm in the U.S. right now, so I'm safe from the rockets. And to be honest, I live in an area that doesn't usually get so many rocket attacks. I mean, the rockets reach that area, but it's not as often as Tel Aviv and other major cities. So do we want to start with what's going on post-war in Gaza, or
if you have any updates, I think it's good to have somebody from Israel, even when you're not in Israel, for maybe any updates of what like one of the things I think, we've been talking about how Israel hasn't really responded yet militarily since this started, and I think Israel is planning a ground operation. I don't think that's a secret. They say it, and I think the time that has passed from the attack until now is longer than the time that will pass between now and when the ground operation starts. Much longer. I think part of the issue was. They recruited 360,000 reserve soldiers, and they didn't have equipment for everybody. So I think that's one of the reasons they're waiting. But yeah, do you have any updates and any thoughts on what's going on?
Well, I mean, updates from the ground, I don't have any. I don't know what they're waiting for. Personally, I would have preferred that they just kept the blockade, like no humanitarian aid, no electricity, no water, nothing. Just let them basically starve until they cave, and let the ground forces enter after they're hallucinated because they haven't drank water for so long. But clearly that's not the method that Israel wants to apply. They're still altruistic. They're still taking into account the world opinion, and which I should say, it's just a second-handedness kind of version of narcissist version of Peter Keating, which unfortunately, I kind of anticipated that this would be the reaction, that nothing fundamental will change after October 7th. But anyway, if we do want to discuss the day after, what should be done with the Gaza Strip, I think this is actually a great issue that we can differentiate ourselves, as objectivists from other intellectual groups, because most people, they view this conflict as a conflict of land, as a conflict of, like a collective group of Jews against a collective group of Arabs, and they think that the problem is that the existence of Arabs, like the existence of Palestinians in Gaza, that's like the major problem. What are we going to do with Gaza, that after we occupy it? And I think when you observe the world in terms of ideas, when you understand that philosophy is what directs the world, you understand that this war is a war of ideas. It's not a war of people. It's not, there's nothing inherently racist, that determines this conflict. So if we manage to defeat Hamas, if Hamas surrenders unconditionally, if they have no motivation to fight against Israel any longer, then the idea of Hamas, the idea of resistance, the idea of wiping the Jews off the map, I mean, that's gone. And then you have no problem with the Palestinians that are left in Gaza. You can still occupy it. You can. I personally, I would be for, if we occupy the Gaza Strip, I would want Israel to implement its sovereignty in the Gaza Strip. Basically occupy it, make it a territory of Israel, and have military troops there for a number of years, just like the US had in Japan and Germany. And the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians in Gaza, they can be like the Japanese post-World War II. They can be like Germany post-World War II. As objectivists, we understand that there's no, like I said, there's no inherent ideas in people. If you make it clear that their ideas are terrible, that they will only suffer from their ideas, that their ideas have no chance of actually prevailing and no chance of gaining any victory against Israel, then they will be submitted. They will surrender, and they'll just accept the new situation, and they will even be able to absorb Western ideas and Western values and just become a part of Israel. But of course, when you have this kind of collectivist view of just differentiating people by their groups, by their ethnic heritage, then you can't even think about that kind of solution. You can't even think about this other reality. You just think that, oh, this war, there's nothing to do. This conflict will just continue, and year on year, forever.
Yeah. So, by the way, this topic came up kind of at the end of yesterday's yesterday's episode of the reality show, right? I thought it deserved more of a discussion, and I think I agree with you. In part, I would like to see Israel again destroy much of Gaza, occupy whatever is left, and I think where we probably differ, as you said, a number of years of military occupation. Yes, I agree that it should be a number. I just think that number should be high. It should be certainly in the double figures. But what exactly it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I don't know how many years the IDF will need to have boots on the ground there, but I mean, I don't think that's so essential or so important. Like, the number of years that the IDF will need to be in there will be the number of years. Doesn't matter. That what matters is that we seek total surrender of Hamas, like just completely surrender. There's no, question who won, or like, there's just complete utter victory and surrender of Hamas and all the other Islamist fundamentalists.
So, okay, I'll get to the super chats, I think, after we go one round around with everybody. Kirk, I believe this is the first time you've been on the show since this happened, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but if not, what are your thoughts generally on what happened and what you've seen since, and of course on what Gaza should look like after the war?
I've thought about this over the last few weeks about like what the Middle East could look like if they embraced in general, like reason and freedom and capitalism. And sounds like it would look like a paradise with its rich resources and all the beachfront property and whatnot. And even a few days ago, I was reading an article from 12 years ago on The Guardian about how a new luxury resort hotel opened in Gaza. And I think it's by the beach, and you think, oh wow, this sounds like a nice place. You might want to, go on a nice vacation, spring break, honeymoon, whatever. Maybe lay by the beach, enjoy some pina coladas, soak in the suns. And even if you read this article, it talks about how but the pool, which could be a big draw, remains off limits until the management can figure out a way to avoid transgressing conservative Gaza's social mores. Men and women are forbidden from swimming together. And even if the hotel has segregated days, it has yet to find a way of screening female swimmers from public view. And there has been no interference from Hamas, according to this article, but like everywhere in Gaza is an alcohol-free zone. And on top of that, the article talks about how this resort's going to struggle to bring in, nice food and whatnot for the guests to eat because of the blockade. And it's like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if Gaza, if the people of Gaza embraced reason and freedom, and it could look like a paradise. It could look like Miami Beach or Las Vegas, some other beach town with resorts. And that's what I would like Gaza to look like. And yeah, it sounds like that's what it might take, is beating Hamas into submission and declaring the terms of their new government, maybe Israeli occupation. I'm not really a military expert. From my knowledge on how the United States handled Japan after World War II by drafting their constitution modeled after the post-New Deal U.S. Constitution and the British system of law, seemed to work out well for Japan. They've created a lot of good culture since. It's a great place to visit from what I've heard. And especially, I'd recommend people check out the book, Failing to Confront Islamic Totalitarianism, which is written by Ankar and Elon Journo. And there's a lot of essays and, essays that were written during the time from 2002 up until now, where they talk about the failed strategy of, the U.S. pulling its punches, trying to abide by rules of war, having lawyers determine which airstrikes were appropriate, sending humanitarian aid to enemy territory as we were also bombing them, and also letting Afghanistan and Iraq and Gaza determine the terms of their new governments, in which case it was always some form of Islamic totalitarianism, in which things unfortunately never got better.
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm going to read the first super chat because it kind of got me. So Roland said, I guess, in answer to the question in the title, what should Gaza look like after the war? He says, preferably like a less interesting stretch of the Sahara. And my first thought was, does he mean the Sahara resort and casino in Vegas, which is not the most interesting one. But yeah, it would be nice to see Gaza turn into something like that. I think that's optimistic, but we maybe not in the last couple of weeks, but we try to be optimistic on this channel. So yeah, let's hope so.
By the
Michael,
way,
yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I've never been there, but I heard from Jewish settlers back in the day when they lived in Gaza that Gaza has some of the most beautiful beaches in Israel. So yeah.
Michael, your thoughts on what Gaza should look like after the war?
What it should look like or what it will look like?
Both.
Well, I just looked this up, and so 28 UN member states don't recognize Israel's right to exist. 15 members of the Arab League don't recognize Israel's right to exist, and 10 non-Arab members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation don't recognize Israel's right to exist. So even assuming they root out Hamas, which I hope to hell they do, it's just hard for me to envision that you can ever have a peaceful Israel in the Middle East. And I'm not saying that means there should be no Israel, but I can't picture that, okay, you get rid of Hamas. Well, what about all the other terror organizations? What about the surrounding countries? I just can't see it. And it's something a couple things kind of caught my attention was Kirk mentioned if the Gazans, if not the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza would embrace reason and capitalism. Well, that would be great. But while I am steadfastly in belief of the moral superiority of Israel relative to the surrounding Arab states, and especially relative to Hamas, Israel hasn't embraced reason and capitalism, not even close. And as far as collectivism goes, in ethnicities, Israel's founded to be a Jewish state. That's based on ethnicity, religion. So I don't know if even, I guess my point is, if even the best democracy over there, Israel, doesn't embrace these things, how can we expect primitive people to embrace these things? I just don't see it. And then in Japan, after World War II, I think, I'm not positive on this, but I believe that we wrote their constitution for them. We basically wanted to turn them into the West. And it seems we've done quite a job of that. But like Razi, what you were talking about yesterday was an Israeli occupying force completely denying the population of individual rights. So you're not going to get a Western style democracy doing that. And I don't think you'd get it writing a constitution for them. You said it's an optimistic station. I'm just not optimistic about how this is going to turn out. I just hope they get rid of Hamas and take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of the names on the list of 28 countries that don't recognize Israel. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I can assume none of them are countries that I would consider moving to. Probably none of our viewers would consider moving to. And in the long run, yeah, I think Western countries should decide to what extent they want to deal with such countries. I mean, those countries exist because we basically, feed them in one way or another, if not through humanitarian aid, as people want to do with Gaza, then through the fact that we trade with them as if they were, decent people, which in many cases they are not. So, Marco, Richard, yeah. What were you saying, Nathan?
Sorry, I can wait for my turn, but I wanted to just interject about one thing that Michael said.
Okay, well, we'll go to Marco and Richard. We'll go to the super chats, and then we'll go back to you.
We're good. That's all right.
Marco and Richard, there's something going on there, but I did want to say that the two of you and me, we have an unfair advantage here that yesterday we were, the shows were earlier than usual yesterday, as regular viewers who watch the show live will know. Because we had an in-person members only event with Yaron Brooks, so it was a rather small event on this topic, and I think Yaron is by far the best commentator in the world on this. So your thoughts on this? I don't know if they've changed after yesterday, but
apologies, we've got an open fire here and it just threw a burning log out into the room, so that's why we had to dart across to stop setting ourselves alight. So in response to the question and to what Michael said, I think a lot of those states that don't recognize Israel as right to exist don't recognize Jews' right to exist, and that's really the core of the problem, isn't it? We're pretending that this is a regional or a geographical issue, and it isn't. It's a religious one at the heart of it. I think when you look back at what people would have said 18 years ago, when Israel first withdrew from Gaza, and all of the promises and aspirations of the most optimistic at the time for what Gaza would look like 18 years on, you need to remind those people of who are often repeating the same kind of tropes now as to how it could look, of what it has done and what it could have been. Because the truth is, you can't impose a political system. You can't impose different standards on people who revert to type. You've seen that in Afghanistan. You've seen that in Iraq. It's impossible to lead people to standards that are so far removed from their own ethics. and Gaza is a sad result of that. So in your descriptions of what you would do, Natan and Razi, I mean, it appears to make a lot of sense to me. I couldn't add to it in terms of what you could do, but it's it's not clean, it's not neat, it's not nice. It's the sad situation we're in.
Yeah, we made the point more than once already, and even today. The issue here is not a political issue. The solution is not political. The solution is much wider than that. It's about how people think, how people behave, and what's the main motive for people to behave. We're talking here a conflict between people who hate life, who worship death, and people who love life. You see it just in the physical appearance of the two places. I mean, you can't look at Israel, at Tel Aviv, and think, oh, these guys don't really understand what freedom is. And you can't look at Gaza and think, oh, these guys really love progress and all that kind of stuff. So whatever political solution you come up with is going to be a mess until both parties will change in the fundamental way that they actually are. Once, as Michael said, Kirk, once people decide to embrace a way of thinking which is based on reality, based on reason, we're going to be here over and over and over again. And to be honest, even the moral actions that should be taken, already we've seen it floundering. We've seen Israel effectively buying their time, just waiting for somebody to tell them, don't do it.
And I don't think we should restrict our analysis to focusing on Gaza here, because what will Israel itself look like in the future? What is the future for Israel? And what about, as we've spoken already, in terms of personal cases, what about all of the many people who take the very understandable decision to move their lives somewhere else in the world? What is the future for Israel when that is a logical choice to make in the circumstances?
And by the way, I'm going to read the super chat. I will give my answers as I go along, but if any of you want to comment on any of them, please make a note or ask me, and I will repeat the question when we get to you. I had a comment on that as well. So Gail, thank you for the super chat. Catherine, thank you. Catherine asks, will there actually be a ground response? Yes, I can't imagine that there won't be a ground response. Israel has done ground operations on over much less. When we did the episode titled Israel versus Israelis, this was that's the issue with the sentiment here. So we know, and we met Marco, Richard, and I met yesterday a couple of other people who three other people who also left Israel and are here in London now. There is also a lot of movement, I think probably more movement in the other direction, of Israelis who for whatever reasons, right or wrong, they saw these images and they decided to fly back. You see planes that are full. There's pictures of people sleeping. El Al has allowed people to just sleep in the without a seat, like get on a plane without a seat, and they're going back to fight. I think it's going to be the wrong type of fighting, which is why, as I said on the show, I would not go back unless they want me to go and press a button. But I certainly wouldn't go and take part in a ground operation. But yeah, people are going and they want to see it happen, and they're already kind of disappointed that it hasn't happened yet, and the people of Israel want now. I think they should have wanted this earlier, but they want to crush Hamas, and it'll be very difficult for the political leadership to do anything less. But as we've seen in the past, maybe they'll find a way. Jonathan,
I think I read a figure that there was like 100,000 people have flown back to Israel to support the cause, to fight.
I haven't seen that number. It wouldn't surprise me if that is the case, but yeah, many have flown. The planes to Israel are full. Jonathan sends a super chat. James Valiant says an occupation like that of Germany or Japan after World War II, that is in response to the title, I guess, of this episode. Ashley Shrugged sends a super chat. Marvin with a super chat says should look like Manhattan or London City in the long-term future with better weather. Secular, high-tech, peaceful, and thriving. Yes, I would love to see that Gaza that you're describing. I think we're only 400 or 500 years away from that, but you know, maybe it can happen in less. But yeah, again, we like to be optimistic, but it's difficult at this point. Jason Adams says after defeating Hamas, could other countries like Dubai or some European nations send viceroys to run Gaza as a protectorate with IDF support and establish normal laws transitioning from occupation? So I actually saw, I think it was former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who I really rather not hear from, say that this is what Israel should do. They should go in, they should take it over, and then they should have some force. I don't want Dubai, running any part of Gaza. I wouldn't put countries that either are or should be considered, if not enemies, then at least not legitimate countries. And I think Dubai is, for me, on that list. Yeah. Megan says, I agree with Richard. Political freedom is the effect of good philosophy within the culture, the cause. Imposing political freedom and expecting cultural change to result, there's cause and effect. Tom gifted an Ayn Rand Center UK YouTube channel membership. Thank you, Tom. Enric says a people can change their philosophy and culture. If it's evident to them, it will fail. It takes time, but accomplished on Imperial Japan, American South, etc. The moral certainty to act on it. Yes, I agree with all that. Thank you, everybody, for all the generous super chats. The fact that reading them takes up half the show is something that I'm very happy with, but I'm not sure our panelists are, because you all have a lot to say on this. So Nathan, let's go back to you.
Oh, I just wanted to defend Israel against some of what Michael said. I mean, there's no question that Israel was founded on, collectivist premises and, socialism. And I would even go as far as saying, there's some racism and mysticism in there. The whole concept of a Jewish state is one that I'm completely against. But I think that it would be wrong to state that that was the essential characteristic of the Zionist movement. I think if we want to, isolate the most essential thing about Zionism, I would argue is that its roots are in the Enlightenment. Its roots are the idea that man has free will and he can determine his own course in life, and he can act. He can determine his life, his values. He can. That's the entire idea of Zionism was, look, we don't want to be just pawns in the games of these foreign nations. We want to be able to determine our own fate, and it is possible. We don't just live in this. There's even a romantic element in it of saying it's not just life as it is, but life as it should be, and that's what that's what started Zionism. And I would argue that is the essential characteristic of Zionism and of Israel. And yeah, but again, I'm not saying that all the bad things are not present. They are. There's no comparison with the founding fathers of America, but Israel fundamentally was founded on Western values.
Michael, do you want to go next and maybe respond?
No, I don't disagree with anything he said. I don't know much about Zionism in particular, other than Theodor Herzl was one of the founders, but everything else, I agree. I mean, I think that the moral superiority of Israel juxtaposed to everybody around them is huge. I could have said the same exact things that I said about Israel about America, by the way. And I'm not saying that as criticism of Israel, but only to juxtapose it, that if Israel and the United States even haven't fully embraced reason and capitalism, what are the chances that Hamas is going to, or that the other Palestinian Arabs are going to? It just seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, I agree. We should embrace it first, and then it will be easier to win the longer term war here.
No
Kirk.
argument.
Kirk, your thoughts on what we're discussing, or your thoughts on any of the super chats?
No thoughts at the moment.
Marco, Richard?
Well, to be honest, the kind of example we're providing to Israel and to Middle East right now is pretty pathetic. The total lack in self-confidence that the West has at the moment, the total not immorality, but very low level morality that we are providing, is actually not helping our case. It's not helping any sort of peace, or even giving a sort of indication of how life could be. These savages see what we do and how we live and what we produce and all this kind of stuff, and they just want it. They don't understand that if they got out of their primordial way of thinking, they could do exactly the same. But we're definitely not providing much of a case at the moment, and that's on us, and that's the kind of stuff we really ought to push and keep pushing in order to change as many people's mind in the West as we can.
Yeah, and absolutely, I certainly second that. And we need to demonstrate by example, and that's the first place to begin in any situation, personal or on a larger scale. I think when you hear the slogans that are chanted on the streets, which I think we're going to move on to in a minute, and which reflect some of the much of the Arab thinking, particularly, this slogan that refers to the area between the Jordan River and the sea, and it refers to the annihilation of Israel. And even if you had the Manhattan that you're talking about in Gaza, there would still be calls for it to spread right across Israel and for it to be Muslim run. So, I mean, we've got to be honest about this situation.
Yeah, in the regular chat, so James Valiant mentions, the British King is still the head of the Church of England. I think in the context of, we have, every country in the world has things to improve. James also says it can get better, Michael, and better is in all caps. Michael, you bring out the all caps out of James. I think this is not the first.
Yes, I see that. Of course, better. I mean, what does that mean? The context we were talking is as if they're going to embrace reason and capitalism, not if they could get better. It was specifically reason and capitalism. I think James likes to argue with me. So that's okay.
And we like to see you argue with James. So,
I love to argue with James. James is a wonderful guy.
Jason Adams said in the regular chat, Dubai may not be an optimal administrator, but we may not get optimal. If we don't get optimal, then I think it should be, again, it should be Israel itself. I'm not, we have this is not going to be difficult to get better than this, but we have UN so-called peacekeeping forces in Gaza, in the south of Lebanon. They only make things worse. And by the way,
I guess
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, something I'll add. I know and I alluded to this earlier, that like what the Middle East really needs is freedom, individualism, the right ideas. I know it's like riddled with Islam and whatnot, but not just like merely imposing the right political system, that, you know, you still need the right ideas festering throughout these cultures. But I do imagine if you were to do something like the United States did with Japan in imposing the British American system of law, that at the very least might help people in these regions who are pro-reason or more oriented that way, who are, you know, more free thinkers. That would give them the opportunity to speak out and be more honest and maybe persuade others in those cultures. That might go a long way. And you can see this in, you know, going back to the Taliban shooting Malala Yousafzai in the face for the crime of trying to go to school. Imagine if that never happened. Imagine like how much that holds a civilization back, where you're really penalizing people for the crime of trying to go and study and learn more about the world and think freely. And think about how much this is going on in places like Gaza, where people are being punished for arbitrary, trivial stuff. And especially when it comes to stuff like blasphemy, criticizing Islam, being pro-science, pro-reason. If those peoples had their rights respected, maybe that would open the door for people in the Islamic world to move away from mysticism. But maybe I'm being a little naive. I don't know.
So James said in the chat, Michael is a wonderful guy too. So yeah, we have our disagreements, but that, you know, that is not personal. And yeah, let's move on to the next topic, because we have 20 minutes and possibly 2 more topics. So the protests. I mean, we've spoken about the protests. I think most days we've spoken about the protests. We'll probably talk about them some more. I was adamant about not calling them protests, and I just did. But certainly in the early days they were celebrations. Now Israel is supposedly responding, so they can be called protests maybe. But it was particularly interesting to see, when the hospital explosion happened, that immediately some of these protests were around Israeli embassies and consulates, and American ones as well, of course, before the facts came out. And I basically want to see what the panel thinks about these protests in general, thinks about what we should, if anything, what should be done legally in terms of in Western countries when we have these protests, leaving aside, of course, the fact that they're blocking the roads and that shouldn't be allowed, but just in terms of the ideas they're expressing, is there a role for government there? Marco and Richard, I'll go to you first.
Well, I think if you start with the premise that the government should ban something, you're already starting from the wrong point. And I note that is kind of the stance that France seems to be taking at the moment compared with the UK. But it's also being heavily flouted as well, and it's a bit incoherent, and it's also the wrong approach. I mean, I think we often talk when we're talking in the abstract about the fact that you have to defend the rights of those you detest the most to speak their minds, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unpleasant. But it should be made morally and socially unacceptable for those views to be expressed, and should be called out at every opportunity. So when you stick a microphone in the face of somebody at such a gathering, and you meet them on their terms, and you accept their framing of the argument, and you don't push back with every single question that you ask and statement that you make to them, then you're complicit in essentially flying those flags that they're flying yourself as an interviewer. And I think that we're seeing far too much of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've criticized the French government for many reasons, but one of the good things they do is they push what they call laïcité, which is secularism. They do not accept religion in any institutional setting. Here, of course, they go against freedom of speech, just trying to pick and choose who can express their views. Frankly, like Richard, I'm in favor of this kind of it's going to sound weird, but anti-Israel protests, because that's what they are. They are actually protesting against Israel. But I want them to come out, and I want to see the faces of the people who are saying this kind of stupid things, the people who are effectively condoning the atrocities from last week, the horror murders that have been unfolding. And the people who effectively are egging on the bad guys in order to do more and more, and they're trying to get the good guys to stop from reacting and stopping the threat effectively. So let them come out. Let's see their faces and let them meet them on the ground. Let's call out the stupid things they're saying, like the Congress women in the United States, like more or less every single politician in Britain and a large part in the West. Let's meet them on the ground and fight back.
Michael, your thoughts on this, and also I don't know if you saw the video of the Cornell University professor who was speaking at one of these protests and who said it was exhilarating, and he was talking specifically about the atrocities, seeing the videos of the atrocities themselves. He said it was exhilarating. It was a challenge to the monopoly on violence and stuff like that. It's yeah. So your thoughts?
I think these people are reprehensible human beings. I think they're absolutely disgusting. Some of them might just be naive and dumb. So I probably shouldn't be so blanketly condemning, because sometimes young people are just stupid, and I certainly was, but it's disgusting. But at the same time, I think they should have the right to say it. I don't think we want the government deciding who can and cannot say what, even if we find it reprehensible. Now, like you said, they don't have a right to be blocking roads. They don't have a right to be on other people's property protesting, but their right to say it, I've got to defend as much as I can't stand it. And there is the added benefit that, like Marco said, that it brings them out and you get to see it. Like, I'm glad that people got to see Black Lives Matter supporting Hamas, because you can see they're not just about Black Lives Matter. They're a left-wing crank organization. And incidences like this allow people to see them for what they are.
Yeah, I'm being corrected in the chat. I don't know what I said about the Cornell guy, but yeah, he's a professor. I don't know if I said student by accident, but
No, you said professor.
Yeah. So, and yeah, and I'm sure he's not the only one who he's not the only one who thinks that. Nathan, I don't know if you saw in Israel, I think it was this East Jerusalem or something, there was a pizza place that advertised itself with a picture of one of the hostages, an elderly woman, and they had her in the pizza, and the IDF went in and destroyed the pizza place. So there's a different approach in Israel. Your thoughts about how the West is dealing with this? How how Israel dealt with that particular place? And
I thought that was in the West Bank, but I may be wrong. Look, I think this issue is complex, and it will require a lot of thinking. And I just did a little bit of thinking before this show. So, I mean, my initial thoughts are that we're kind of discussing two separate issues here. There's the question of protests as such, and then there's the question of, supporting your enemies and supporting disgusting thugs like Hamas and Islamic totalitarians. And I think that in terms of the protests, I mean, Ayn Rand wrote about this in the 60s. You do not have a right to assemble in public areas. The protests are a kind of, they are initiators of force. It's an initiation of force. It's we should not tolerate protests like that. You want to assemble peacefully, sure, rent a place or do it in your own private area. That's fine. But the fact that we permitted these protests for so many decades, it's going to bite the West in the end. I think that this is a real problem. I think that when you have, masses of people assembling in the streets, that's a real show of violence, and that's scary. And eventually there will be no option other than if they start to really riot and make, things like we've seen in the BLM riots in the US. I mean, there will be no other option than to just shoot them to be able to stop them. I think that's what's going to eventually happen. In terms of the support though that they're showing, so I think that even in a time of war, and especially in countries, in Europe and the US, you should allow them to express their opinions, their ideas, even if these ideas are horrendous. I mean, unless you're actually supporting Hamas, or some enemy of your country, whether it's financially or you're a member of the group or something like that. Unless you are in that category, then I think you should have your rights protected and you should be able to express your opinions. In Israel, in a time of war, though, again, this is just my kind of initial thoughts. I think that Israel does have a right to clamp down on people who express, explicitly show support for Hamas and Hezbollah and her enemies. I think Israel, in a time of war, and if we are really serious about the war, right? If we're actually serious about winning and about bringing these terrorists or these Islamists to submission, then I think Israel does have a right to, arrest people who show support like that. But again, I don't think that Israel is serious. I don't think it's pursuing victory. And in that case, I think it is dangerous that Israel would start arresting people based on their ideas, because if it's not only restricted to a time of war, then this could just develop into just full-blown fascism. So it's a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in thinking about this, I try to kind of separate. It's a tough question, in terms of what the government should do. I think, emotionally, my reaction to seeing that pizza place taken down is not necessarily in line with what I think government should do. But I'm not that sure about it. And that, I asked Yaron Brook yesterday when we had the event with him, which, by the way, the audio was recorded. It will come out at some point in some form. But yeah, I asked him about this, and the point that he made was, if you want to do something about protesters, you have to declare, you have to declare the enemy, or declare who the enemy is and declare war on them. You can't just do that until you you recognize who you're fighting against. Kirk, I don't know if this is a stretch, but you're a comedian, and I think, I think when I think about about free speech and certainly about there's the cultural aspect of cancel culture and so on. I think, have you seen South Park, COVID Wars, I think it was called? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I don't remember much from it, but I remember watching it. Yeah.
Well, so it's it's like 40 years later and so on, and COVID is still going on. And one of them became a comedian, and you see him doing his stand-up, and he says something like, "Hey, what's the deal with Hispanics? Well, they're wonderful people, blah blah blah." Like, you can't tell any jokes that might be offensive, and I certainly think that's where the culture is going. So I don't know if you have any, as a comedian, unique take on free speech, and in a sense that pizza place can say, this is a joke, it's dark humor or something like that. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
No, I definitely get the sense that if you're at a war and you have people supporting the enemy, then yeah, I think free speech gets a little more complicated in that context. But no, I'm more, Marco, Richard, and Michael kind of took the words out of my mouth. Like, I'm kind of the sense of let people show you who they are. And Michael brought up Black Lives Matter. And I'm noticing, because Black Lives Matter Chicago put up a poster with the paraglider with the Palestinian flag. And now a lot of people are looking at this saying, I marched with you 3 years ago and supported your cause. And this is what you think about this conflict. You're glorifying the people who slaughtered innocent people in Israel. And yeah, there's a part of me, it's like, yeah, just let these people show you who they are and where they stand. And I think it looks like right now there's a lot of moral reckoning. A lot of people are starting to realize how horrible their fellow travelers are across both on the left and the right, especially if you see like what Ben Shapiro has been saying and seeing all the replies to his tweets. A lot of it is crazy right-wing accounts who are anti-Israel. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize how horrible a lot of their fellow travelers are.
Yeah, and speaking of horrible people, the BBC is we in the UK are kind of forced to pay for it. I mean, you can I think Richard, you mentioned when we spoke about BBC in the past, you don't have to, if you don't own a TV or you don't watch live television, there's like, it's not a tax on everybody. It's just a tax on anybody who wants to watch live television in their home. So, but yeah, we are, those of us who do watch live television are forced to pay for it, and our money goes to a channel that when they see images like what we saw on October 7th, they call the perpetrators militants. They don't want to use the word terrorists. Israel's president commented about it. He's upset about it, by the way. Israel's president, it's like a symbolic position. It's similar in some ways to like the king or queen. He doesn't actually do much. But yeah, this was enough for him to comment on. Michael, I'm going to go to you first on this with your thoughts. And I will tell everybody, by the way, that we only have 5 minutes left because we have the briefly objective in a few minutes.
I don't really, it doesn't make a difference to me whether he calls them terrorists or militants. I don't have a strong opinion on it. I think that I recognize them to be evil. So if you just describe what they do, now, if a news organization starts playing games with the facts, I'll give you an example. I wanted to reread what happened in 1948 with the Palestinians and being instructed to leave their homes by the Arab countries. So I looked it up, and it says when the fighting started, the Palestinians left their homes. Well, they didn't just start, like they made it sound like it was a spontaneous combustion that came out of nowhere. You had 5 Arab countries invade Israel. So if a news organization plays games like that, that bothers me. But militant to me isn't too far removed from terrorist. Maybe I'm wrong and I just don't know the definitions properly, but that to me is not a big deal.
Not that in Israel, this is a very big deal. This is something that's often spoken about, how the issue is covered worldwide. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't know if my view will be distinctive here, but I mean, I think that these terms are completely neutral. I think militant, terrorists, I mean, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, there are basically 3 categories of warfare. So you can have a military warfare, guerrilla warfare, or terrorist warfare, and neither of them say anything about who's good and who's evil. I mean, you can be a terrorist against, I don't know, Nazi Germany, and I think that will be a good terrorist. So I think after 9/11, we kind of, the term terrorist just like is associated in our consciousness, like with something bad, with like an evil, with a bad valuation. But I think that it is a neutral concept. I mean, I understand that terrorists usually target civilians, and maybe that's why people say, "Oh, terrorists are bad." But I don't. My view is that targeting civilians is not necessarily always evil, especially if the war is against a nation that is completely barbaric and evil, and and deserves to be fought against.
Kirk, your thoughts on the issue?
When I read the head of the BBC's response, he didn't say this, but I thought if there's any reason to hedge and say, oh, we're only reporting that like this government entity describes this group as a terrorist group, I immediately Googled to see if they've ever called the NRA a terrorist group, which is what a lot of people do these days. And I did find a headline from the BBC saying like San Francisco organization calls NRA a terrorist group. And I thought if there's any reason to hedge, it's to avoid lawsuits and litigation, because that's a pretty big thing to call someone. So I would say that's what I don't know if he should have said that, but I can maybe understand it from that perspective, that like they might not throw that term around because they're afraid of getting taken to the cleaners in court.
Well, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization in the UK. So, Marco, Richard, I don't know if you watch the BBC, but you live in the country where,
we just pay for it. First of all, the BBC is not just a channel; it's a corporation. They've got many channels, radio stations, and a world service across the globe where they spread lots of poison. It's a taxpayer-subsidized piece of evil. It's made up of leftist urban dwelling parasites who don't have a problem saying that, for example, live on telly, to report that the attack to the hospital could only come from Israel because of the Southern explosion. They didn't have a problem with that. They don't want to call Hamas terrorists. That's fine. Just call them Islamists. We'll make up our minds.
They say that terrorism is a loaded word. That's their argument, and they're not in the business of telling people who to disapprove of morally. Well, I think that's just ludicrous, isn't it? They claim that this is an objective stance, but to be objective, you have to define your terms. You can't obfuscate behind vague, imprecise, or bland words, particularly when you're also in the business of catastrophizing every other issue, whether it's the climate, racism, or colonialism, and using loaded terms all the time. You're fusing the two into a muddy grey mess in the middle, and you're not being objective in the slightest.
Well, at the Ayn Rand Center UK, we call Hamas terrorists, and we are not taxpayer funded. So thank you, everybody, for the super chats. Our audience has been very generous today. We are a few seconds away from the premiere of the Briefly Objective video for today. Hamas wants civilian deaths. That's the title of the video, edited by Marco and Richard. So make sure you watch that. There should be a link there is a link in the live chat. And of course, subscribe to that channel, and we'll see you all back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thanks.